Zale closed his eyes as a fresh wave of freezing rain began, his trembling fingers now too numb to pull his furred cloak any tighter. Every breath was a punishment. The air on Xylar Prime was so heavy and toxic that my lungs were burning, as if someone were filling them with molten lead. We had all been left there to die. 50 elite recruits from the finest galactic academies, now reduced to huddling in the mud, while Chloe, the lone human, was humming as she pulled a waterproof tarp from her bag like she was preparing for a picnic. Have you ever wondered how someone can hum while standing at the edge of the grave? Perhaps humans don't feel fear, or perhaps they see possibilities where the rest of us only see an end. Stay close, because what I witnessed that night changed everything I thought I knew about the dark. Only 2 hours ago, everything had been proceeding according to protocol. Our dropship breached the cloud layer and dumped us into the heart of a Class-12 Deathworld. The rules were simple: survive 26 hours, reach the extraction point, and transition from cadet to officer. But 10 minutes after landing, our commander, a 4-armed veteran warrior, was weeping in the muck because the atmospheric pressure was crushing his primary skeletal structure. Being Vexary, my body cannot process extreme cold. When the temperature drops below 10 degrees, our circulation begins to crystallize, turning us into living statues. I was huddled behind a jagged volcanic outcrop, cursing my existence. I held a datapad intended for survival notes, but my mind was fixated on a small, insignificant stain on my sleeve from the landing. It is strange how the brain works. Death was knocking, and I was preoccupied with a smudge of dirt. Chloe approached me. She wore that same baffling, serene smile. She dropped her heavy ruck onto the black soil and scanned the horizon, where toxic trees clawed at a violet sky. "Phew," she said, wiping sweat from her brow. "Air's a bit thick, isn't it?" "Thick?" My lungs were agonizing, and she called it thick. I tried to respond, but only a dry wheeze escaped. My fur was already beginning to stiffen, the biological warning that my core temperature was reaching a critical low. I was losing consciousness. Then, I watched Chloe do something insane. She reached out and grabbed a shrub covered in thorns the size of daggers. I wanted to scream. That was a Xylar stinger. Its neurotoxins could fell a megafauna in minutes. But Chloe stripped the leaves away with casual ease, discarded the toxic blooms, and twisted the branches into a makeshift rope. You will die," I managed to shudder. "Nah," she replied without looking up. "Just making some arrangements. It's going to get chilly tonight." Her nonchalance made me angry. Did she not understand where we were? This wasn't a park. This was a place where apex predators came to perish. I assumed humans simply lacked the cognitive complexity to recognize true danger. It was the greatest mistake of my life. As the suns dipped below the horizon, the wind shifted. The cold became so piercing that the other cadets stopped moving entirely. They were entering stasis freeze, a state from which there is no return without a heat source. Chloe grabbed me by the shoulder and dragged me into a small crevice in the rock. What I saw there defied every survival manual in the sector. She had gathered a pile of debris, dead wood, dried husks, and things we considered refuse. From her pocket, she produced a small metallic device. A thin wisp of smoke appeared, then a spark, and then fire. I had never seen fire this close in my life. In our civilization, fire is something confined to laboratories or engine cores under strict containment. To us, fire is synonymous with uncontrolled catastrophe. Yet Chloe sat before it, warming her hands. The radiant heat from her camp was softening my frozen fur, the very heat of life itself. "What is this?" I asked, my voice finally steadying. "It's called a fire Zale," she said, tossing a twig into the dancing flames. "On Earth, we couldn't have survived without it. Our blood contains actual iron, you know? We need to keep the engine running." I looked at her. In the flickering orange light, she looked like a goddess from an ancient myth. She had tamed a force the rest of the galaxy fled from. A mixture of terror and awestruck curiosity warred within me. I feared the flames would consume us, yet I found myself crawling closer to their warmth. The night didn't just get cold. It became a predator. Outside our small crevice, the wind howled with a frequency that made my auditory canals ache, a sound like grinding metal. But inside, the air was different. It was thick with the scent of wood smoke and a strange, comforting dryness. I watched Chloe reach into her pack and pull out a small, foil-wrapped square. "Want some?" she asked, breaking off a piece. "It's an oat bar. High calorie. Your metabolism is probably crashing from the freeze response." I took it. My claws were still slightly stiff, but the warmth of the fire was working miracles. I watched her eat with a rhythmic, casual pace that felt entirely out of place on Xylar Prime. She wasn't scanning the shadows for the six-legged stalkers that ruled this plateau. She wasn't checking her chronometer every 30 seconds. She was just there, existing in a state of absolute defiance against a world designed to kill her. "How are you not terrified?" I whispered, the crackle of the flames punctuating my words. Chloe leaned back against the jagged stone, looking up at the smoke curling toward the ceiling. "Back home, we call this a camping trip with free heating. Honestly, Zale, Earth tried to kill us for 1,000,000 years before we figured out how to build apartments. This jungle is just disorganized." I stared at her. To her, this lethal environment was simply a matter of poor urban planning. The hours crawled by. Occasionally, we heard the screech of a predator nearby, and every time, my fur would stand on end, my internal resonance frequency spiking in a sharp, crystalline distress. But then I would look at Chloe. She would just poke the fire with a stick, the orange light reflecting in her eyes, and my panic would subside. It was a secondary thermal regulation, not of the body but of the mind. Zale did not remember falling asleep, which was a professional failure he would later have to document. And yet, waking up to the sound of heavy rotors felt like a dream. The rescue ship descended through the toxic haze, its floodlights cutting through the gloom of the jungle floor. I stood at the mouth of the cave, my fur soft and warm, watching the elite recovery team scramble out in full environmental suits. They were moving with frantic urgency, weapons drawn, clearly expecting to find a graveyard of frozen recruits. Instead, they found a resort. 49 cadets were huddled around a series of small, controlled fires that Chloe had helped them start during the deepest part of the night. They weren't dying. They were lounging. One of the Vexari was actually drying his damp tail tuck near the embers. The lead recovery officer, a massive armored Brenthic, stopped dead, his armor plates locked with an audible click of pure, unadulterated shock. He looked at the fires, then at the human girl who was currently trying to roast a local, non-toxic tuber on a sharpened stick. "Cadet!" the officer barked, his voice booming through his helmet's external speakers. "Explain the status of this perimeter. We detected multiple Class A heat signatures. We thought the volcanic vents had breached." Chloe stood up, dusted the ash off her trousers, and gave a small, tired wave. She looked at the officer, then at the surrounding lethal jungle that had failed to claim a single soul that night. "Danger zone? Guys, back home we call this a camping trip with free heating." She took a bite of her roasted tuber, winced at the taste, and shrugged. The officer didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched her walk toward the extraction ramp with the casual gait of someone leaving a particularly mediocre hotel. I followed her, clutching my datapad. I had supposed that humans were simply too simple to be afraid. I realized now I was wrong. They aren't simple. They are just the only species in the galaxy that looks at a nightmare and decides to rearrange the furniture. I looked back at the dying embers of the fire. The wood was ash now, gray and cold, but the air in my lungs still felt warm. I thought about the report I had to write, and for the first time in my career, I didn't care about the protocol. I reached down and picked up a small, charred piece of wood, the echo object of our survival. I tucked it into my belt. It was just a burnt stick, but to me it felt heavier than any metal.